You're listening to Lab Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartel.
No matter what part of the school year it is, I think teaching is better with a little humor. And I think our guest today not only agrees, but argues that humor is essential when communicating science.
Sarah Rose Siskind is a science and comedy writer, comedian, and founder of Hello SciCom. We were fortunate to hear her keynote address at the South by Southwest EDU conference, or as they say there, South by EDU, last spring. Her keynote was titled Science Comedy, Why It's a Thing and How to Do It.
Now, the best part is, by sheer luck, we met up with Sarah after the conference. We were actually waiting in a barbecue line. And after some great conversations and some joking around, we knew we just had to have her on the show. So as soon as we reconnected, the laughs began again.
Other than that, how would you like to be addressed on the show?
Your Royal Highness, I think, is like a good casual opener. What do you mean?
Now, can we do YRH just for that, just for short? No, yeah.
Sarah Rose, Miss Sarah.
Yes.
So sometimes we get some snooty, pretentious doctor types that like,
it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's memorable. It leaves a imprint.
We've had a couple nights, so like sir sometimes is appropriate, but not all the time. So if there's anything that you want to,
Your friend Neil deGrasse Tyson, when he was on the show, blew that off also. He was just like, if my pedigree is more important than what I'm saying, he had this whole thing about it.
We all know people like this who you speak to them and they might tell you what fancy college they went to. They might tell you that they were straight A's in one subject or another and lead off with that information. Now, why are they leading off with this information? Well, because they want you to then believe more strenuously in what they say in the sentences that follow. Whereas if they were genuine experts in something, they wouldn't have to give a past performance in a subject in order for you to believe what they say. The sheer strength of their commentary would carry sway of that moment. If I'm not convincing to you, my pedigree is irrelevant. And if you only believe what I say because of my pedigree, then what kind of world is that?
Wait, you had Neil on your show.
A long time ago, yep.
That's fantastic. Oh my God. That's wonderful. Were you able to say anything the entire episode?
Yeah, we got some questions in.
Yeah, he was pretty good. I mean, because it focused on science teachers and stuff, I think he was pretty good. He talked about spilling milk from his kitchen table with his kid and just different things. So
he was good.
There's a great supercut of him on the Joe Rogan Experience. That's just Joe Rogan every time he gets interrupted, and it's hilarious. I long ago when dealing with Neil, ask him one story and then just sit back and enjoy.
Yeah, it's just
sort
of
keep
like
it
press
going.
Play.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that was back in the early days there, and we were fortunate enough to get him there, and we were talking a lot about science communication back then, so that was a perfect...
Wait, when is back then? When did you guys start?
2007.
Oh my God, that is so impressive. Good for you guys.
Yeah, it's going good.
We still enjoy it.
I went through the Bill Nye one just recently because I was looking for the... well, we can talk about this. Bill Nye started in some comedy scenarios himself because he was... motivated, if I remember his story correctly, by imitating Steve Martin.
Oh, yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, there's a Steve Martin documentary coming out, or that has come out, and so that got me thinking about him, and so that was the crossover there. He tells that story of how he became all of that. But speaking of how he became, can you give us a little tour? We like to ask guests a little tour of how you got, let's start off with just who you are, what you do, and then we'll go into how you got to where you are. Thinking about that, a lot of times this gets used as a thought about backstory about students, for our students, to explain that not everybody starts really good in high school science and then goes straight to the lab to get issued their lab coat. So whatever path it is, we're interested in.
And there are careers in science beyond scientist.
Yeah, so let's start off with that. Who are you and what do you do?
Why the hell am I here?
I should also mention that this is geared towards science teachers, but sometimes we have students listening in too.
Okay, excuse me. Why the bleep? Can I bleep myself live?
You don't have to bleep yourself.
Don't worry about it.
Okay, yeah. Well, I hacked into this Skype session. No. My name is Sarah Rose Siskind, and I have the bizarre title of being a science comedy writer. I have a company of other crazy people who do the same. It's called Hello SciCom. And what we do professionally day in, day out is we help scientists and technology professionals be more entertaining in all their communications. I also have a side job as a stand-up comedian, and I talk a lot about psychedelic science and neuroscience on the side. And then for some reason, I have a subspecialty within my company of working on a lot of social robots. But I would say social robots are about a quarter of our clientele, which is like a fun specialty because I formerly worked in robotics. And I'm just like an utter science geek out of New York City. And I can't believe my job exists. Don't tell anybody. I'm afraid somebody's going to tell me I have to get a real job.
Do the robots only pay in Bitcoin, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's what they keep saying they're going to pay, like that humanity will pay.
Oh, yes. Just wait for the payback.
Exactly.
Yes,
so I guess
sense.
it's sort of a net 90s situation.
You get a free extra vacuuming or something like the
Yeah. Oh, there you go. There you go. Yes, yes. You can buy tokens, AI tokens. That's what you're getting. So,
Exactly.
well, you must. So this is your current role. What got you here? Is that a straight path, a meandering path?
I love it. I love it. It's sort of like record scratch. I bet you're wondering how I got here. And then, so yeah, I studied science in high school, and I really loved it. I wasn't the best student in middle school until about freshman year of high school when my friend got all A's, and I literally was like, wow, that looks symmetrical. I'm going to try to do that. Like, that's an interesting motivation. So,
wow, I never thought about that, but the A is the only symmetrical grade.
yeah. Yeah, so I was like, passionate about symmetry, I guess. Anyway, hopefully that
If you can see Dale's face, he is like thinking back to, if I only realized that early on, I would have gotten better grades. Just that alone.
there's one kid in the audience who heard me say that and is like, whoa, you're right. I'm going to turn my life around and do it.
Yes.
That will all be worth it. So
Yes. Don't do it for the, for the learning. Do it for the design aspect.
yeah, exactly. Just see if you can. So I got good in school for that stupid reason, and I studied a lot of science. I did the science fair a whole bunch because my high school had sort of like somewhat limited science courses, and so I did like an independent study. I was really interested in neuroscience, and so I did that. But when I got to college, I kind of saw the direction a lot of the people interested in science were going, and it was very specialized, very serious. There's a lot of requirements, and there wasn't a lot of sort of cross-disciplinary opportunity, which even at Harvard, and Harvard strives to do a lot of like cross-disciplinary stuff, was kind of disappointing. The humanities were much better about that, even the social sciences. So I actually studied government, which had the least number of requirements. What that says about government
Correct.
and all the people who eventually became politicians, I don't know. But at Harvard, it's considered by far like the easiest major concentration. So anyway.
Crack the code.
Yeah, exactly. Crack the code. I took only science electives, and it was funny because everybody else would be in the science elective because they were pre-med and stressed out and this was required, or they were like, going down some very serious path, and I was just in the back of the class like, this is great. You guys actually have answers to stuff. Oh my God.
I'm still stuck on cross-disciplinarian because I'm envisioning an angry librarian like, skrrr.
Yeah, or somebody who's just really mad at the way you make crosses,
I like that even better.
That would do
That's
it right.
Good. That's good.
Anyway, so took a lot of science electives and thought, I just did it because I was like I'm here. This is like a great opportunity. It's not going to help me in my career, but might as well just learn about how our universe works. And I was really passionate, in particular, about astrophysics. And I got to study with this guy, Bob Kirshner, who's like a really awesome astrophysicist, and the house master of like the house I was in. Harvard's very antiquated. Was an astrophysicist named Howard Georgi. And he was like, it was interesting because he was like a big supporter of proton decay as like an explanation for supersymmetry. And he had this like huge experiment go awry, and he was like shortlisted for the Nobel Prize. And then the experiment did not prove his theory. And so he was really depressed, and you could never rent a common room. Like for the entire time I was at that house, like it was really hard to rent a common room from. And so I was like obsessed with proton decay because I was like, please work out. I need to rent this common room.
You're rooting for him.
Yeah. So I had, supersymmetry and symmetry were the things that motivated me throughout my academic career. Anyway, graduated and got into journalism, which was terrible. I studied political humor. I was like, interested in bringing some levity to the serious subject of politics, and, went into journalism after college and just hated it. Like, this was 2014. The world was becoming very, very polarized, not the world that I grew up in, and left after a year because I couldn't take the toxicity, frankly, of the environment, and like found comedy again as my therapy. And so, quit my job, no backup, lived very cheaply for a couple of years, and just did comedy full time at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater.
Oh, okay. So improv comedy?
Yeah. Well, they have a sketch writing team at the theaters, mostly known for improv. But the benefit of that really is that the most talented actors in New York City and LA would be at this theater. And to be able to write for people who can perform at that level it's an unbelievable feeling. Like, it is so cool. So I got that extreme privilege and learned a love of comedy. And while there, I met by a total chance meeting this woman, Helen Matzos, who's like an astrobiologist with NASA, who was also the executive producer of this show called Star Talk with a little person named Neil deGrasse Tyson. You like that intro?
There we go. Yeah, there we go. Just put the Neil deGrasse Tyson on top of the sundae, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really like an inflection point in my life, was starting writing for that show. I felt like I found purpose. I felt like I was like, I was like very depressed about like the political landscape at the time, and I subscribed to like a positive news in the world newsletter. And what I started noticing is that every single story about positive news was about science. Like, it was about like more people are getting vaccinated in Africa against diseases that killed millions of people before, so it's going to save millions of lives. And it was just like advancements in different treatments and like different ways to treat climate change. Like, there were all these like wonderful advancements against these huge problems. And I was like, wait a second, like, why are we fucking like paying attention to political news? Like, we should be looking at science news. I became really passionate, particularly on Star Talk. We had all this opportunity to have these world-class scientists on and to give them a platform where they could like really reach a wider audience because they were entertaining people. There was like a comedian on set who was going to essentially translate what they were talking about for the lay public, or make them slow down and appreciate the absurdity of what they were saying. So I just fell in love with that field. It's such a great time. I got to work with like a lot of heroes of mine in the comedy world and the science world. So I just am like the luckiest person in the world. But the show was canceled in like 2018 or something like that. And when the show was canceled, I worked for a guest on the show by the little old name of Sophia the Robot. Sophia the Robot was this like celebrity robot who you've probably seen before, though you may not remember her name. She looks like what you think she would look like. She's like a pretty woman with like the back of her head is open and you could see a bunch of like servers and stuff. And she's kind of the inspiration for like Ex Machina and for Fiona on Silicon Valley.
I was just going to say, it reminds me of the Silicon Valley one. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's like, that was like a straight parody because she then sounds and her name is like Fiona. So it was very similar, and that was great publicity. And I got to head up part of her personality development and what she would actually say. And this is like the early days of chatbots. This was 5 years ago. And so in chatbot history, that's approximately 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Because like it was so primitive compared to what we have now with ChatGPT. We were working on a very different system. This was like, I was working on the proton decay of chatbots. So it was like this beautiful theory that didn't quite work out.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of
what is something back then that was like now it just seems like unheard of. Or it was like such a hill climb back then, and now it seems pretty commonplace.
Oh my God. Everything.
Is it all of it?
The biggest thing by far, was, the ability to clone voices. So to create a voice clone where you could essentially type in any words and then you would get the same voice to have the same audio output as recognizably the same voice. That process took minimum 40 hours. And these are 40 pure hours, so no breaks, and they are grueling. They're grueling, and I know this because I had to do it when her voice needed an upgrade a couple years later. They're grueling because you have to read these sentences that make no sense, but they're trying to catch all the phonemes in every possible rhythm of the English language.
Yeah.
Of which there are many. English is a particularly comprehensive language, as I found out in the hardest way possible, because it is Anglo and it is like essentially like Germanic and Latinate. So we have a way wider lexicon than like any other language, I believe. And so it's really grueling to go through all of the, not every possible word, but every possible phoneme. So, essentially what used to take 40 hours has now collapsed to 40 seconds.
Wow.
You can go to a lot of different websites, but the most famous one is 11 Labs.
Yeah.
Upload like less than a minute of you talking and it will make a voice clone. And it is and it's even better. And it's better because they've essentially used AI. They've leveraged AI in an interesting way. They essentially have used thousands of hours of people saying even more phonemes, but then attached your voice signature onto the generic voice. So I believe that's how it works under the hood.
When you were doing it, it was more like just training one based on one.
Now we've learned how to use everybody. We've had to, this is how the beauty of like the large language model system and a lot of like generative AI is the ability to take advantage of tremendous amounts of information, even when being specific about one thing.
Yeah. 11 Labs lets you, I believe it's 11 Labs, where now you can speak in your different intonations. And so it'll then redo that voice in the way you said it with the new voice, which is pretty sweet.
So cool. And so like I did that, like that process of touching up her voice. We were also trying to get her to sing. And so I was like helping a little bit with that, which was crazy. This was March of 2020. I couldn't leave my room. I couldn't go to a voice recording booth. I was supposed to fly to Scotland to do this. So instead I stuck my head in the case where we used to put the robot, which is filled with foam. And it's like that was my recording studio. And I worked so hard that I don't know if this is why, but I got COVID because I was like, my voice was completely shot for like weeks after.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, that's like reminds me of of all the New York Times reporters that were doing like podcasts and stuff. I remember one was like, I have a studio that is basically his dining room table with blankets underneath it, and he's sitting under his dining room table during COVID to record. Yeah,
that's really good because you also have, if you have a carpet underneath there in particular, I learned a lot of acoustics in this time period.
Sure.
And like also, by the way, the robot got stuck in my apartment. The robot was like touring. It's like a very expensive $multi-$100,000 robot. It was like touring. It happened to be in New York in March of 2020. And then when everything shut down, it couldn't be shipped back to Hong Kong where she belongs in her lab where they can actually take care of her well. And so they were like, okay, well, you're the only employee we have in New York. You need to take care of her. And so this like humanities nerds who like was learning essentially very intense hardware upkeep and how to make sure that the robot was functioning properly.
Now, did your lease allow robotic pets and things like no?
I want to know what you did to mess with her, like, because there's got to be a point where you had like you broke in COVID, like, all right, We're just going to see what episode of Friends she cracks.
I think it was a lot more like she was messing with me.
Oh,
God, yes.
The tiny apartment, me trapped with a robot in social isolation, just being like, "You'll never get COVID and leave me."
so
Some weird stuff.
So was she connected to people on the other end? Could they like view everything that was going on in your apartment at the time?
Only if I allowed them remote access to her IP. Like, and the engineers would do that occasionally when I just was totally out of my depth. But mostly no, she was not a telepresence robot, though she has been used that way before. And so it was just like it was such a crazy time. Like, yeah. I remember working on her late one night because I always had to work on her late because the engineers in Hong Kong, it's like the other side of the world. So I'm like in my apartment, the heater is broken for some reason. So it's really, really hot and they can't send somebody to fix it. So I'm in like a sports bra and boxers and it's 2 a.m. and I've got the back of this robot opened up and I'm like soldering, and my neighbor across the way is just like, what the fuck?
Is this a movie? What is happening?
Yeah.
I'm making my companion. COVID has broken me.
We'll be right back. Well, let's move from the theme of robots because you said a lot of your clients are robots. Right, okay. But what about? Can you give us an idea of like what that job is, what you do?
Sure. So okay, that was the robot job, and that ended in the middle of 2020, and that was when I started my company, where I had learned from Neil the importance of making scientists entertaining. And I had learned from my robotics job the importance of making technology entertaining. And I was like, smoosh, I'm going to do this full time from now on in a much more stable way where, you know, the show can't be canceled and we can't run out of funding. And I'm going to have a company where we essentially make scientists and technologists more interesting and entertaining. And so we've been going for 4 years. And because of my experience in robotics, I have a lot of robotics clients. In particular, the biggest one we work with is Honda Research Institute, has a really great robot that we work with. And we've published a bunch of papers about how entertaining writing can create a more personalized experience and better user reviews of your experience with the robot. I also helped out with the voice of that robot and wrote a paper about that. And then I also worked with like this multi-billion-dollar entertainment venue that I can't name. And we worked with this, like through them, I worked with Amica at Engineered Arts, who is this unbelievably beautiful humanoid robot that is just like next level cool. So that was another kind of client of ours, and we've worked with other smaller robotics companies. But yeah, we tend to just like, it's a lot of like product design, feedback, and chatbot design, because humanoid robots are always going to be for education and entertainment at this point. Bipedalism makes no sense for a robot that has any sort of like factory purpose. Like the world is built for, you know, tall, vertical, relatively skinny creatures, but it's the amount of effort it takes to find a creature that can have balance. It's kind of just cost prohibitive for anybody. Like what Boston Dynamics has evolved with their robot, whose name escapes me, who's bipedal, or like Optimus, which is like Tesla's robot. Like they're really cool, and that you're solving interesting problems along the way, but just like not, I think we're really far out from needing humanoid robots in any useful capacity. But for right now, because they're education and entertainment, that's why my company has worked with so many and why they're so useful.
Sure.
Like the elder care and child care might be the first things that they get used for that's like somewhat useful, because you've got to fit into a home rather than a factory, and also because you need to work with lay people who are not experts, who can't be trained in using you. Right. So there needs to be some amount of like, you know, ease of communication.
What are some of the non-robots work that you do? It's a weird sentence, right? Yeah.
I love that sentence. And in a way, who's to tell? You know, who
Yes.
can know?
How will we know? Oh,
I love
boy.
all my clients, robotic or otherwise.
Yes, they're all my children.
Exactly. I haven't changed since the pandemic. I'm just making friends. We've worked with all different kinds. One recently that I'm super proud of, we worked for a kidney donation activist who just spoke before Congress, and we helped make her remarks more entertaining. We've worked for like a neuroscience professional development group, writing their speeches, making them more entertaining. I've like speech coached a healthcare billionaire interview Obama. That was like really fun. I've like, we've helped a bear safety expert punch up her course. We've helped professors with a lot of their curriculums. We've like helped a elder care robotics, non-robot companies. We've worked.
I was going to say, Brian and I actually had the chance to hear you speak at South by Southwest EDU, and I remember when you mentioned the kidney donation.
Yeah.
You had you helped them with a comparison to the cost of college, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
It was like a way to kind of relate. I can't remember if you can.
No, that's exactly right. Wow, good memory. I'm always amazed when people actually listen to the things that I say. So that's super flattering. Thank you, Dale.
The kidney triggered it. I remembered it because of that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but that was the thing is like she's speaking before Congress about, this topic that most people think they know, but not really. And like the point that we made was how safe kidney donation surgery is. Like it's significantly safer than childbirth. Oh my God. And so the joke was, kidney donation is safer than childbirth, and you don't have to pay for them to go to college. So that worked on congressmen. Apparently everybody related to the college is expensive.
Well, it is so bringing it to our science teaching classrooms, it's all about drawing that line about where they are to where you are and making that connection. And that was when you gave your talk, one thing that I wrote down was the way of using humor to combat boredom, but you kind of tackled boredom as it struck me some of the downsides of boredom, can kind of really have a hard oh gosh, what am I trying to say? It left some more dent than just the old I'm bored on the person. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Oh God, absolutely. Boredom is soul crushing. Like people, there's a wealth of research about the actual consequences of boredom, but it can be a little bit hard because the correlation can be hard to determine, but it's bad for your mental health, and it can really kind of destroy the positive association people have with science. So if you're constantly associating science or math with these undoable problem sets and a disciplinarian teacher, you're going to associate all of math with those things, which is why there's such a movement among educators to try to undo some of the programming, particularly around math. But it's boredom is there's no way to study this per se, but I would love to find the economic loss to our GDP because of boredom. Boredom is essentially miscommunication. A lot of the time, there is boring stuff like information that people need to process, regardless, but it's the amount of time, money, and effort lost due to a poor transmission of information is incredible. And there are some basic tactics through showmanship to get people interested in what you're saying. And for too long, they've been kind of isolated just to areas where people expect to be entertained. And they need to be applied to areas where information retention matters. I was just at the vet, and this more has to do with how information gets relayed, but I was just at the vet, and she gave me so much lateral horizontal information that was so abstract and was using so much jargon that I was overwhelmed. I'm already on edge because my cat is sick, and I'm totally overwhelmed. So the next time I went in, and don't tell my vet, Sarah, I know you're friends with my vet, Dale.
She's a huge fan. She's a huge fan of the show. Sorry, I don't know what to do. Yeah.
Veterinarians love us.
Yes, we're huge. We're huge with veterinarians.
Veterinarians and what's the state?
Wyoming. People from Wyoming.
You are in the pocket of Big Cat, and I knew it.
Big Wyoming cat. Yes.
Big Wyoming Cat.
Yeah.
Classic.
He's got a hairball LLC.
So anyway, I surreptitiously used a transcription service called Otter AI that I'm in love with to record what she was saying and essentially to organize that information in a way I could comprehend. And what I needed was hierarchical information, or sort of like a flow chart, which was like if this, then this step. And then that step has like 3 branching options. And eventually I was able to create that flow chart. And it was so much more useful and it was so cathartic. And I realized like what a waste of time it would have been if I didn't have a tool like this or like a process for receiving the information in a way that could help me make the decision I needed to make. So I am obsessed with boredom and just poor communication of information because it has these massive consequences. And I talk about this on stage, but like there's a lot of funny studies about how people would rather electrocute themselves than be bored. So it's like this great University of Virginia study where they made a bunch of undergrads, because it's always undergrads, essentially sit in a room alone and report how bored they felt, and surprise, they felt bored. But when they had the option of electrocuting themselves or just being bored, even though these people had reported that they would rather pay money than be electrocuted, if the alternative was being bored, they would choose electrocution. I just love it when a study says so much about a phenomenon. It's a little confirmation biasy, but I love that study because it proved the intuition. I just also love what undergrads have to put up with because I tried to make money in undergrad doing medical studies, and I relate to those poor.
Well, you said you worked with professors now, and you know, I can imagine like working with them is a little tricky because they may have this know-it-all kind of aura about them, and they might think they're funny already. Kind of like have you been watching Resident Alien with Alan Tudyk?
I watched a couple of episodes. Yeah.
The way that he, like basically pretends that he's funny is funny to us, of course, but like that's kind of the way I feel like some professors might try to be funny.
Like Lost in Translation, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so there's a couple of things. One, I want to applaud any attempt because it is an attempt. I want to applaud the attempts that are about empathy for the interlocutor. Sure. There's one kind of humor which is like just to entertain yourself, and that's like I'm ambivalent about that. That can sometimes be good, and sometimes it's alienating to your audience. But anybody who's trying to entertain the other person is doing a mitzvah. They're doing a kindness. They're trying to because when you're a comedian and you get up on stage, one of the reasons it's scary is you realize like I'm taking up your time, a finite resource you can never get back. Like it better be worth it. And so trying to entertain an audience is a way of showing respect for people's time and trying to make it worth their while. Now, when people are funny in a way or trying to be funny in a way that's not really considerate of the audience, that is what is known in the industry as a dad joke. And I'm sorry to use that slur on this podcast because I assume I'm pretty sure you're both dads, correct?
Yes, yes.
And I am sorry.
What if it's a dad joke and you are basically acknowledging that I am saying a dad joke now? Does that make it better?
It makes it better because now people are laughing at you. And that's fine.
Self-deprecation kind of thing?
Then it's self-deprecation, and then that's fine. If it's a dad joke, like a lot of dad jokes are like created for the expense. And they are meant like because for some reason, not as a dad myself, I don't know why, but apparently it brings you joy to see your child grown in the face of a joke. I don't understand this feeling, but it's the antithesis of what a comedian tries to do. A comedian really tries to meet you where you're at and genuinely entertain you, whereas for some reason dads get a schadenfreude of like not entertaining their audience, but entertaining.
Gosh, I wonder if I'm going for that now. No, I gotta.
Yeah, but is the groan itself a part of appreciation?
I don't know if I'm trying to get the groan or I'm just trying to find somebody who enjoys it as much as I did.
different then. So what I'm talking about is like you're trapped in a car and you're on a road trip, right?
Uh-huh.
And then your dad is like, you know, making really bad puns about all of the like motels you see on the way. This may be a personal example.
I sense some deep-seated trauma.
Should we visit the Do Drop In, guys? You know, things like that. Anyway, it's like, and then you hit your, I don't know, hypothetically 3 daughters in the backseat of your, I don't know, hypothetical minivan, like groaning, and yet you persist. That to me is the quintessential dad joke, where it's persistent despite the groans. Now, if the dad finds the joke so funny and they're like laughing at themselves, and then the kids are now laughing at the dad, we have genuine engagement, because now the dad has become the fool, a type of a self-deprecation, and now everyone's having a good time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you get this in the classroom too. It's sort of like, all right, you're basically talking about, are you losing your audience or not?
Yeah.
You know, I had a teacher when I was in high school who had the jokes written in the lesson plan. And then later in life, I found myself, I didn't necessarily write them down, but they came back to me, and I would be able to teach that same section 3 times in a row, and I'd make the same joke. And it was basically my own little giggle to just make the day go on, I guess, you know, sometimes. But
to break up the boredom, I think that would be the characteristic there.
Yes, but there's a couple things going on here. I suppose if your audience, in our case, if your students, if your classroom is like just so derailed by they're so kind of turned off by, is this person only going for the lame joke? Or the other thing is it's just a huge distraction, which we talk about a lot in teaching, is like a seductive detail that's there that just pulls the kid's mind out of the topic, and you've lost them.
That's exactly right. It's essentially what you want to avoid is self-indulgence. That's the antithesis of empathy, which can really drive good teaching, understanding where the audience is at. So yeah, it can be hard, but like that's why in writing there's like the term "kill your darlings." Like you've got to have some self-discipline.
Yeah. Is it considered like, so if I think of a classroom of 28 students, you're gonna have some that'll chuckle at this and some that'll laugh at that. Do you have to think about that in your work as something to be, I almost want to say like multimodal, kind of this thing that's going to hit as many people? Is it like, I'm going to try to find the thing
gronometer.
Yeah, hit the most amount of people with success, or do you need to just have variance so that you can keep everybody? It's like you're spinning all the plates, or is it something that can spin all the plates at once? Do you have to go around one by one?
Love that. I love the concept, and I love the word multimodal. I was going to say multi-level, but that sounds like a marketing scheme. So I like multimodal. So the best example of like a multimodal joke for the audience is like Pixar. Like a lot of like high-funded children's movies operate at multiple levels. So like oftentimes you'll hear like a very surreptitious like innuendo or like sex joke in a children's movie, but it's so subtle that like the kids would never get it. You know what I mean?
It's for the parents.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like here's one that's like just having Alec Baldwin be the boss baby. You know, like everyone who's seen Alec Baldwin and Glenn Ross already kind of finds that funny. Kids, they don't care. They don't know who Alec Baldwin is. So that's like but they do like the voice. You know, they do like the fact that the voice is discordant with a baby. And so it works on like sort of 2 levels. And I know I have a lot of like friends who are like early comedy writers, often get their start in like children's shows, and it can also be its own expertise. And it's really great when you can do that multimodal joke that appeals to many different audiences. I will say, before I went out to South by Southwest and they told me I was going to have a signer, which I've never had before, and that there would actually be deaf people in the audience, I was like, that's amazing. And I really actually spent a little bit of time thinking about like, is there a joke that I could make that would like work on 2 levels, like work with the audience who can hear, but also work with the audience. Like how awesome would that be? Because I'd done a gig once in India to an audience that didn't speak English. And I was like, and essentially I was told the night before my friend's Sangeet, which is like the wedding, like a dance show where I was supposed to be the MC. And she was like, so yeah, the audience also really only speaks Telugu. And I was like, okay, how do I do this? And so finding ways to tell jokes across barriers is like a beautiful and hard artistic challenge. What I ended up doing for the Sangeet was like doing a lot of like translation error jokes. So like, you know, I had the co-host like whisper, I'd be like, how do I say this? And then he'd whisper in my ear, and then I'd say out loud like, I'm a monkey's butt in Telugu. And all the Telugu people would be like, that's hilarious. And so I was able to work across language barriers a little bit. And that's always like really, really validating when you can hit multiple levels at once. As a teacher, you know, you're working on a certain level with kids, which is why you want to make sure you're not making Cheers references to your Gen Z audience, because obviously they're not going to get that.
Yes.
She's such a Diane. I mean,
yes. You know, that's funny though, now with streaming, some of those old jokes, the kids are watching those weirdest things and then, you know, like, wait, you went into some show before you're born, of course. Yeah, no, that's a good point. So should we talk a little bit about distractions? Like, do you have any suggestions about? Yeah, there you go.
How you feeling, Sebastian?
I think my cat right now for the listeners.
Sebastian?
This one, Phantom.
Nice.
Phantom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk about distractions, Phantom? Because that's something that Brian and I've had a lot of discussions about. We talked about this a little bit because we met up after, just serendipitously, we met up at the
really long barbecue line.
The really long barbecue line. There you go. And we're
enjoyed that a lot, guys.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, it was like afterwards we talked about how it just kind of, you know, was total chance. But we were talking about the road signs. We talked about this a little bit, about road signs on
highways.
Interstate highways, where they have puns. And I just saw one the other day where they have little jokes about St. Patrick's Day, or they have jokes about, you know,
use the force, but always wear seatbelts.
Yes,
you know, something
that
like
kind
that.
of stuff. And that they have passed a bill that I think in 2026 that's going to go away. And the rationale is that it is too in the know. In some ways, they can be groany, you know, like dad joke-esque. But the other part is that there's only some people that understand it and others don't. And we try to avoid that in teaching, but there's a lot of pushback on that because teachers will struggle with killing their darlings because they love it. And so they're like, I want this Yoda cartoon on my test. And it's like, it's a huge distraction. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. Thanks for bringing that up. Because, I remember us talking about that in line because I had flown into Austin for the talk, and I was flying United, and there was like a new United in-flight safety video. And they include these like semi-bloopers in them and a lot of like kind of jokey things.
And they're on the fake plane too, right?
They're on like a fake plane. At one point, the flight attendant is talking, and like a kangaroo rips the green screen behind her, and she laughs. And I was thinking about it. I was like on the plane, and I was like, you know, I remember when these first started coming. Like I remember when in-flight safety videos were not interesting, like they were not fun or whatever. Like now, you never board a flight where the in-flight safety video is boring and straightforward. But I remember when I first boarded them, that when I first saw an interesting one, I was like, oh, wow, like it's a musical, or like it's like there are jokes, or they're not actually on the plane. This is kind of interesting. And at this point, I was like, you know, what I would love to do a study measuring how people feel about them, because I think like the worst case scenario of when not to use humor is like the plane is currently on fire and need information about how to leave ASAP, and the flight instructor is like, 2 atoms walk into a bar, and you're like, why is this happening to me? Like, I think that is like taking that as the ad absurdum like worst possible situation for a joke, I think you can deduce a couple of things. Like, bad jokes happen when time is of the essence. Like, you truly cannot be distracted. Number two, completely irrelevant jokes to the topic are like, you know, very far afield. And then I think like not matching the tone of where you're at is also really important. Like, it's one thing to, you know, if you're in an emergency situation and you're waiting for the police and everyone's really tense, and, you know, you can make, you might be able to make a cathartic joke that assures people, gives them some sense of relief. That could be useful, and you're not exactly matching the environment in the room, but you're trying to guide it. That could be okay. But if you're totally discordant, these are all situations in which using a joke is probably not advantageous. But I really am curious to test the boundary. And so, yeah, if you have any researchers out there listening, I'd love to actually test this very subject. I don't what that means though in terms of the experiment might be dicey. Like me going into like a motorcycle gang bar and doing stand up or something.
The closest that I can think of is the educational research on seductive details that's been done.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so that's where those, I mean, it can be as almost down to like
peppering tests with colors and images that don't have anything to do with the content.
And
I think test taking also, here's the big thing about those examples. Number one, you cannot read your audience. Reading your audience is really, really important for comedy, because comedy is built on empathy, and you really don't know what people are going through at this point. And number two, a test in particular is when people are like really anxious, they're focused, and they're like focused on time. So I think that, yeah, a test, unless you were to do, I've seen tests do like a joke at the very, very end of the test, and it was also like an optional answer, and that might be fine, but like particularly at the like maybe the end of the school year or something. But yeah, if it's like in between, that's just cruel.
Well, putting like a Far Side comic maybe it is even related to the content or something like that.
Yeah, which I definitely did. I would do Foxtrot comics and stuff because they would do a lot of physicsy ones, and I thought like, isn't this funny? But in retrospect, the kids weren't necessarily reading those comics anyways by that point, and you know, so you were losing. The joke was missed. You know, looking back, that's a darling I would kill. That I would remove from there. The other thing is you can overload. You can put too many in, and then it's just like. You know.
Well, we had a colleague that would like take the margins to the edge. I mean, and it like when he had worksheets, it was like completely like you didn't even know where the word started and ended because he filled it up with anime and other stuff there. And
well, it gets tricky because your students are emerging, figuring out themselves. They are some being diagnosed about how they handle attention and focus and those kinds of things too. So you don't want to. In your attempt to, I guess, seem engaging or entertaining even, or the quote-unquote engagement word all the time, that you're going to actually lose those students.
Yeah. I think like the other thing, by the way, earlier about your cartoon inclusion is what's great about that is it's already like beta tested. It's already, you know, because it's a published cartoon and because it's not into a main journal, you already kind of know that it works on some level.
Oh, sure.
That's useful because also the other thing to know about like for the difference between like a teacher and a comedian, one major difference is that comedians try out their jokes like dozens of times before doing a special. And teachers, you actually do have like a controlled classroom to a certain extent, which is cool. But it's important to know that like most comedians will say that most of their joke attempts fail. Like for me, it's probably true. Like I would say at least 2/3 of the jokes that I write, I don't end up using regularly for sets. Mm-hmm. So it's one of the things that makes a good comedian is actually their ability to not tell a joke. Like,
sure.
It's like not a great example, but Louis C.K. started this trend, or he's the first one I heard of, to start this trend of every year throwing out your entire set. And that's really dramatic for a comedian, but I've subsequently heard a lot of them doing the same, where it really forces you to, you know, be creative and think of new stuff.
I think about that with teaching where, you know, like first hour, First hour is always weird because the kids are still kind of in their seats sleeping, but by the time you got to like third or fourth hour, you had it down, you had your timings, and so you do have some rehearsal. I feel bad for the elementary teachers who it's like they're only doing one thing and then the next take is next year.
Oh, when I was my first year, I was doing 5 shows a night basically. Because it was this every day was the same. Well, it was 4 shows because I had the same.
Did you have
physical
eighth
science
hour in
class.
their seats, Rorendale?
8th hour was my only earth science class, so that one was all like, do the
First
joke
and last.
Burn it because didn't teach it again. So, but the physical science that 7th hour physical science had everything polished by that point.
Can I ask you guys a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So like when you're like teaching, do you think of it as a performance? Like, how do you think of yourself on stage, quote unquote?
Oh, absolutely.
I do. I don't know if all teachers do, but I do.
Yeah.
I was never an actor. I never acted in anything, but I on a whim. Well, I did it for a girl. There was someone who wanted to try out, and I was like, sure.
Wim Peterson.
I will. So I'll go out and try this out, and I'd never done it before. And I got the lead and she didn't, so there we go. But I had no exposure in acting whatsoever. But at when I thought about it, I'm like, well, I do. I have this experience in front of people, and I am reading the room. I'm kind of thinking about it. I have a memorized set, so to speak. So I did think about that. There was little things that I didn't know, and it was very clear to the theater group that like, watch him do this. He doesn't know how to do this, But no, I do think it's a performance, and I think it should be.
You and I both, you did chemistry shows, and so did I. I did science shows. When we were in college, we both happened to work, was yours work study or something like that, where we would do college, where we would do shows
we just blew stuff up.
With elementary schools or middle schools and things
With
like
stuff
that.
on
so
fire.
There was performance. Yep. But I was a theater, forensics, and choir kid too. So, but I don't think every teacher's like that. And I think that's where when we saw your talk at South by Southwest, we were like, inject humor into your classroom, for example, is going to, I liked how you said it was like, humor is a story that has an unexpected ending and that helps you remember it. And that seemed natural as Brian and I talked, but I imagine it's not natural for all teachers. I know it's not. I know that some teachers, probably like some of your clients, will say, well, I'm not a funny person. I guess before we let you go, I think you touched on this a little bit, that everybody can kind of pick up some strategies that they can, still make this work, even if they don't think that they can, that it can be learned in some ways, right?
Oh yeah, it can be. There's a lot that can be. There's an innate, there's an innate tendency, but there's also like a craft you can cultivate. And the easiest way, but the most important way, is actually to develop your taste. So there's this great quote from Ira Glass about creativity, and he talks about how when you're just beginning in a field, sort of like the Dunning-Kruger effect, your taste is bad and your ability is bad, but because your taste is bad, you think you're doing okay.
Oh yeah, that is like Dunning-Kruger.
And as you develop your taste, then you go through the crisis where you're like, I am not good at this thing. And so you think you're bad at it. But the truth is, you've actually just made a huge improvement. A lot of people don't improve their taste. And so now comes the hard work of improving your ability until eventually your ability can catch up. It'll never fully catch up to your taste, and neither should it. Your taste should always kind of be appreciating things that are better than you, than your current ability level, unless you're truly the best at your field, I guess. Anyway, so anybody can sort of develop their craft of humor. And also there are, very basic strategies that I outline in my talk, which is available online, which are just come up with a metaphor for how something works. What are the major traits of how that works? And then make a pop culture reference that has those exact same traits. And it helps people visualize in their mind in a silly, absurd, but relevant to them kind of way, that very thing. I just also realized and then there's a bunch of other tips in the talk. I just realized you guys are physics and chemistry teachers, and those were the subjects in school that I had candidly the worst teachers in, and am now the most interested in. Currently working on a physics show for National Geographic, and do a lot of shows about psychedelic chemistry. I love that you guys are this interested in like science communication and you're in those fields. That's like, this feels like a therapy session.
Oh, well, that's our time. And it actually is almost our time. So.
No, it's just so great to hear because, like, yeah, chemistry was the only class I ever got a detention in. And my physics teacher was, like, fired for, like, sexual abuse, public school, blah, blah, blah. Anyway.
No.
So, like, really not, kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel there. And, like, I love these fields now. Like, I truly, truly do. And so it's just great. Like, because both of these fields have something in common. Like math, you can't always see the human side of it, but it affects so much of humanity. And there's a story to be told there about the way it affects humanity and about the way it affects the world that humanity lives in. And so I will say that, like, a lot of what communication tries to do is accentuate the human side of fields that don't have that as apparent as something like history, which is an obvious story. Like, these fields can be made into a story, particularly when you can either humanize them or talk about their human consequences.
Well, I think sometimes when we're in the classroom, and I guess one of my worries is that we're not retaining enough teachers to develop their craft, to understand, like when we see new teachers come through and they're like, oh, that just didn't land, or I just didn't feel good about it, you can kind of walk through them like, yeah, you got a few more chances to redo this, and just being aware of the students, aware of the content, and how to revamp it, how to, I guess that old age kind of saying of how do you get through to students is the key there. And humor can be one of those ways, but it is a way of showing that you care about them, because it is a way for them to be, I guess, not taken by boredom. I mean, well,
you're learning a little about them, trying to make that connection too. So
right.
There's a great quote about, like, you were talking about how do you, like, get through to your audience. There's this great meme online called "How Do I Reach These Kids?" and it's from the movie Stand and Deliver about, like, it's like a calculus teacher. And South Park does this, like, brutal parody where Cartman is just always saying, like, how do I reach these kids? And it's like, it's a phenomenal parody. And what's great about it is, like, the answer to the question is the format of the question, which is to say humor and memes. I mean, that caught on like wildfire, and now all these, like, generations of kids know Stand and Deliver because of the South Park parody. So it's kind of a meta example. That's how you reach these kids.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for your time. And we will post the video that we were able to watch in person of you that gives a lot of examples of how you can use humor and how not to use certain types of humor in the classroom. And it's well worth a watch, and we thoroughly enjoyed it and really appreciate your time talking to us, and love to hear more in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for having me, Dale. This was super fun.
This was great. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to our show. If you'd like to know more about this episode or any of our previous episodes, visit laboutloud.com. Lab Out Loud is produced by me, Dale Basler, and my co-host, Brian Bartell. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for Lab Out Loud, visit laboutloud.com/contacts. Thanks again.